You'll enjoy the view from the street, Margaret. This house, this fortune, none of it belongs to you anymore." Her words landed like broken glass, sharp and deliberate. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood in the center of the mahogany-paneled study, her black dress from the funeral, not yet cold. She didn't shed a tear at my son's graveside, but now she smiled. Smiled as if death had been her lottery ticket. $42 million and a mansion in her name. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because what happened that day taught me one thing: betrayal wears designer heels and smiles with perfect lipstick. Let me take you back, before the sneer, before the lawyer cleared his throat and changed everything. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I am 71 years old, and 3 days ago, I buried my only son, Daniel. He was 45, a brilliant architect, the kind of man who could draw lines on paper and turn them into cathedrals of glass and steel. But all the genius in the world couldn't stop the blood clot that stole him from me on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I remember standing at his grave, my hands clutching the wooden rosary beads his father had carried in Vietnam. The priest's words blurred, the sound of dirt hitting the coffin louder than everything else. My Daniel, my boy, who used to press dandelions into my palm when he was 5, lowered into the earth while his wife stood beside me, scrolling on her phone. Vanessa, 34, sleek, beautiful, with a heart as cold as the marble floors she adored. I had never trusted her. Not really. From the moment she married Daniel, there was distance. She didn't like my cooking, said it smelled too old-fashioned. She didn't like my stories, said they were out of touch, and slowly, piece by piece, she pulled my son away from me. Family dinners canceled, phone calls unanswered, holidays cut short. Still, I told myself she was young. People grow, people change. But that morning, after the funeral, when we gathered in the lawyer's office to hear Daniel's will, I realized Vanessa hadn't changed. She had perfected her cruelty. She leaned back in the leather chair, crossing her legs, her diamond bracelet catching the light. 42 million, she whispered, almost to herself, then louder so that I could hear. Finally, my sacrifices are rewarded. I knew Daniel would choose me over anyone else. Her eyes slid to me, sharp, mocking. Anyone else, meaning me, his mother. The woman who had raised him through fevers, scraped knees, sleepless nights. The woman who had stood in the rain outside baseball fields and saved for years to send him to college. I felt my breath hitch, but I stayed silent, my hand tightening around the rosary. And then, just as Vanessa leaned forward with a smile that promised victory, the lawyer cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, his voice slicing through her triumph like a blade, "there's more you should hear before you celebrate." Vanessa's smirk faltered for the first time. She shifted in her chair, the diamonds at her wrist clinking softly as if they too had grown uneasy. "What do you mean there's more?" she demanded, her voice edged with impatience. The lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, adjusted his glasses and unfolded a sealed envelope with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred texts. His hands were steady, his expression calm, but his eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, and in that glance, I saw something that kept my heart beating. "Daniel's estate is valued at $42 million, Whitmore began. However, he left very specific instructions regarding how that inheritance is to be managed. Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound that rattled against the paneled walls. Managed? Daniel trusted me with everything. I was his wife. What could possibly be more specific than that? Whitmore's voice never rose, but it carried the weight of stone. The majority of the estate is held in a trust, and the trust is conditional. I leaned forward, my rosary beads cool against my palms. Vanessa blinked. Conditional? Conditional on what? The lawyer's tone was precise, every syllable sharpened. On your treatment of Daniel's mother. Margaret is not only named as co-beneficiary, but also as the trustee, overseeing the distribution of assets. To be clear, your continued access to the estate depends entirely on demonstrating respect and support toward her. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's eyes widened, then narrowed, the veneer of composure cracking at the edges. That's absurd. He would never. Daniel adored me. He trusted me. Whitmore lifted a second document, Daniel's signature crisp at the bottom. This amendment was made 6 months ago. After his hospitalization for pneumonia, Daniel expressed deep concern about his mother's future. He stated, and I quote, "I want my mother protected above all else. If my wife fails to honor that, she forfeits her share." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. My Daniel had thought of me, even in his last months. He had known. He had seen, through the polished mask his wife wore. Vanessa's chair scraped violently against the hardwood as she shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. She's lying. She manipulated him. I wasn't even in the room when he made the changes. I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel made his choice. Her face twisted, caught between disbelief and rage. You expect me to bow down to her, just to keep what's mine? Mr. Whitmore's gaze was unyielding. It was never entirely yours, Mrs. Caldwell. Not without conditions, and I must also add, your behavior today will be noted in my report to the court. Vanessa froze, as though realizing that her sneer, her arrogance, the very words she had thrown at me minutes earlier had already betrayed her. I sat still, hands folded over the rosary. My heart ached for my son. But in that moment, I also felt something sharp and undeniable rising inside me. Hope, wrapped in justice. Vanessa's heels clicked against the hardwood as she paced, her voice rising with each step. This is outrageous. I gave Daniel the best years of my life. I built this family, this home. And now you're telling me everything depends on how I treat her? Her finger jabbed toward me like an accusation, as if I were the intruder in a house I had once cleaned with my own hands. Mr. Whitmore remained calm, his pen scratching notes across the legal pad. That is precisely what I'm telling you. Your husband's instructions are legally binding. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. Just the brittle edge of desperation. Daniel was sick, confused. He didn't know what he was signing. I found my voice. Quiet but steady. My son knew exactly what he was doing. He had seen the way you pushed me aside, Vanessa. The way you erased me from his life piece by piece. Do you think he didn't notice? Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. Erased you? I gave him space to live without being smothered by an old woman's traditions. You think he needed his mother clinging to him forever? No, Margaret. He needed a wife, and I was that wife. Her words cut, sharp and deliberate. But underneath them, I heard what she wouldn't admit. Fear. Whitmore cleared his throat. For the record, Daniel's state of mind was affirmed by 2 witnesses and a physician. There will be no argument of incompetence. Aye. Vanessa's lips trembled as she sank back into her chair. For the first time, the diamond bracelet at her wrist looked less like a trophy and more like a shackle. I could feel the shift in the room. The smug certainty she carried into this office was unraveling, thread by thread. You think you've won, she muttered, voice low and venomous, sitting there with your beads and your sad little stories. But I was his wife. I was the one in his bed, in his life. He promised me everything. Oh, I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. He promised to protect me. And even in death, He kept that promise. For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Then Vanessa slammed her hand against the desk, rattling the stack of documents. Fine. You want respect? You'll get respect. But don't think for a second I'll play servant to you, just to hold on to what I deserve. Whitmore looked up from his notes, his voice crisp. Be careful, Mrs. Caldwell. Every word spoken here is evidence. The court will judge whether your treatment of Margaret fulfills the conditions of this trust. And right now, you're digging your own grave. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed crimson, but she said nothing. I sat back, rosary still in hand, the beads warm now from the press of my fingers. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Enough to know the war had begun, and that victory might finally be mine. Mr. Whitmore flipped to another section of the will, his expression unreadable. There's something else, Mrs. Caldwell. Your late husband was thorough. Vanessa stiffened. More conditions? Her voice cracked slightly before she recovered with a sneer. Go on then. Let's hear how much further you'll let his mother meddle in my inheritance. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read aloud. In the event of my death, all marital property and financial assets shall be placed into a structured trust. The trust shall be co-managed by my mother, Margaret Caldwell, as trustee. Disbursement to my wife, Vanessa Caldwell, shall be contingent upon quarterly reports of financial responsibility and upon her maintaining a respectful, cooperative relationship with my mother. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture. Quarterly reports. Cooperative relationship. I watched the color drain from Vanessa's face as each phrase landed like a stone. This is insane, she hissed. What am I? A child? Reporting to his mother? Whitmore closed the folder with deliberate calm. You are a beneficiary under conditions. Those conditions are binding. If you can't meet them, the entirety of the estate will transfer to Margaret as sole trustee. Vanessa's composure cracked. She shot to her feet, pacing the office like a caged animal. This is manipulation. Margaret poisoned him against me. She's been waiting for this moment. I lifted my eyes slowly, forcing her to see me not as a weak, grieving woman, but as the mother she had underestimated. I didn't poison him, Vanessa. You did. With every cruel word, every time you isolated him from me, every moment you chose control over kindness. He saw it. He knew. Her lips trembled, but anger quickly smothered her fear. You're lying. He would never put you in charge of me. He trusted me. Whitmore cleared his throat again. If I may, there's an additional clause you should be aware of. Daniel stipulated that a record of your behavior at this very meeting would be entered into evidence. He anticipated that emotions might reveal true character. Vanessa's eyes widened. What? Today's proceedings are being documented, the lawyer said evenly, tapping the recording device on his desk. Everything you've said, the disrespect, the accusations becomes part of the record the court will review to determine if you are fit to inherit. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa's confidence shattered into fragments, her body rigid, with the realization that she had already incriminated herself. For the first time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't needed to. My son had already written the truth into law, and his wife had done the rest with her own arrogance. Whitmore leaned back, his gaze level. Mrs. Caldwell, I would advise you to proceed with caution. Your husband foresaw this exact scenario, and as it stands now, you are dangerously close to losing everything. Vanessa sank back into her chair, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. The war was far from over, but the battlefield had shifted, and for the first time she knew she was no longer holding the winning hand. Vanessa's laugh came sharp and bitter, echoing through the office like broken glass. You think you can control me from the grave? Fine. Let's pretend these ridiculous conditions matter. Do you really believe I'll grovel to her just to keep what's rightfully mine? Her voice dripped with venom, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she smoothed the hem of her black dress. Mr. Whitmore folded his hands neatly on the desk. Mrs. Caldwell, I must remind you again, nothing is rightfully yours without compliance. The trust exists to protect Daniel's wishes, not to serve your pride. I was his wife, she snapped. I was the one by his side every day, not Margaret. She clung to him, suffocated him. He would never— Never what? I asked quietly. My voice was soft, but it cut through her tirade like a scalpel. Never see the way you mocked me when you thought he wasn't listening? Never notice how you kept my grandchildren away from me? You think he was blind, Vanessa? My son saw everything. That's why we're here. Her eyes flared, but before she could unleash another tirade, Whitmore tapped the folder again. And there is, in fact, another matter, one that directly affects your eligibility. The room stilled. Whitmore pulled out a slim file, sliding it across the desk. Our office has been monitoring financial activity on Daniel's accounts for several months. He grew suspicious after certain withdrawals didn't match his records. Vanessa froze. I leaned forward, my rosary clutched tighter. Withdrawals? Whitmore adjusted his glasses, reading from the file. Over the last 8 months, Mrs. Caldwell, nearly $200,000 was transferred from Daniel's business account into personal accounts you established under your maiden name. Small amounts, carefully spaced, but unmistakable. Vanessa's face drained of color. That's not true. Daniel authorized those transfers. Whitmore's eyes didn't waver. Did he authorize the purchases made with them? Designer jewelry? Resort bookings? Wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands? Because I have his written notes here, documenting his concern that funds were being diverted without his consent. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence in that room was deafening. For years, she had hidden behind beauty, behind charm, behind Daniel's love. But now paper, ink, and her own arrogance stripped her bare. Finally, she managed a whisper. He must have misunderstood. I was managing things for us, for our future. Whitmore's voice was calm but merciless. The court may decide whether that constitutes mismanagement or outright fraud. Either way, it directly violates the trust conditions. One more step toward forfeiture. I watched her sink deeper into the leather chair, the confidence leaking from her body like air from a punctured balloon. For the first time, Vanessa looked small, and for the first time, I allowed myself the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of vindication. The game she thought she'd won was only beginning. Vanessa's mask shattered. Her chair screeched back as she stood, leaning over the lawyer's desk, with both palms pressed against the polished wood. You won't take this from me, she hissed, her voice low but trembling. I gave Daniel everything. If you think some dusty papers and an old woman's sob story will strip me of my future, you're gravely mistaken. Her eyes snapped to me, blazing with hatred. Do you hear me, Margaret? If you think you can sit there with your rosary and your tears and play queen of the empire, I'll make sure you regret it. I didn't flinch. I simply let the beads roll through my fingers, one by one, the sound soft, steady, unbroken. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat deliberately. Mrs. Caldwell, I strongly advise you to temper your words. Threats will not serve you here. They will, in fact, be added to the official record. Vanessa laughed harshly. Let the court record it. Let them see the lengths I'll go. Daniel loved me. He wanted me to have it all. That's the truth. Whitmore opened a second envelope, thicker than the first, and laid a set of notarized pages on the desk. His voice was calm, but the edge of finality in it cut sharper than her rage. The truth, Mrs. Caldwell, is that Daniel anticipated this reaction. which is why he included a contingency clause, one that activates if your conduct following his death is deemed hostile or abusive toward his mother. Her head yerked up. Contingency clause? Whitmore nodded. Yes. In the event that you displayed hostility, disrespect, or threats toward Margaret during or after probate proceedings, your share of the trust is void. Permanently. All control passes to Margaret Caldwell, sole trustee and beneficiary. The words hung heavy in the air. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. A fish gasping for air in a tank she had just poisoned herself. I sat still, the quiet steadying me like an anchor. For the first time since Daniel's death, my grief eased just enough for me to breathe. My son had known. He had seen her cruelty, her ambition, and he had shielded me with the only weapon left. The law. Vanessa's voice cracked into a whisper. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Whitmore's pen tapped lightly against the table. He did. And Mrs. Caldwell, the moment you threatened Margaret in this office, you fulfilled the condition. It's over. The silence was deafening. Vanessa staggered back into her chair, her diamond bracelet clattering against the desk, as if even her jewelry was abandoning her. Her eyes darted to me, pleading now. But the venom was gone, replaced by raw panic. You can't do this to me, she whispered. I have nothing without him. I met her gaze at last. My voice was low, almost gentle. Then you should have cherished him while you had him. Whitmore slid the final document across the desk toward me. Mrs. Caldwell, all assets are now under your sole control. Please sign here to confirm your acceptance. I took Robert's fountain pen, the same one my son had used countless times, and signed my name with steady hand. Across from me, Vanessa broke. The tears came then, heavy and furious. But they no longer moved me, because in that moment I knew the truth. Daniel's promise had endured. Even in death, he had protected me. And Vanessa? She had destroyed herself with her own arrogance. The following week, the story spread through town like wildfire. Wealthy families thrive on gossip, and the fall of Vanessa Caldwell was the juiciest morsel anyone could ask for. Did you hear? Mrs. Whitaker whispered to her bridge club. She thought she inherited $42 million, but it all went to Margaret. At the grocery store, whispers trailed behind her like shadows. At the country club, heads turned when she entered, eyes narrowing with curiosity and judgment. What had once been her stage for flaunting diamonds and designer gowns became an arena of humiliation. I didn't need to witness it directly. The calls came to me. Neighbors, acquaintances, even distant relatives rang to say, "We're so sorry for how she treated you. Everyone knows now." I said little in return. Vindication didn't need to be shouted. Silence, I'd learned, was far louder. Meanwhile, Whitmore moved swiftly. All accounts, properties, and business shares were transferred into my name. My son's empire, once dangling in Vanessa's manicured hands, now rested in mine. One morning, I returned to Daniel's house. My house, now with Whitmore beside me. The locks had been changed. The staff, uncertain where their loyalties lay, looked at me with tentative respect. I walked through the marble foyer, past the grand staircase, and into the living room where Vanessa had once mocked me. The air felt different, lighter. Vanessa, however, was still clinging to denial. She arrived an hour later, fury burning through her designer sunglasses. "You can't just waltz in here," she screamed from the doorway. "This is my home." Whitmore held up the court order. "Legally, Mrs. Caldwell, this residence belongs solely to Margaret. You are no longer permitted on the premises." Her face twisted. She looked at me expecting pity, but I only stood there, my rosary warm in my hand, watching the woman who had stolen years of peace from me unravel. "Please," she whispered suddenly, her voice breaking. I have nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen. The clubs won't take me back. Even the children from Daniel's first marriage won't speak to me. I'll do anything, just don't take this house. Her tears were real now, but they fell on deaf ears. You took my son's last years and turned them into isolation, I said, my tone steady, cold. You tried to take his legacy too, but you underestimated him and me. Security escorted her out as she wailed, her heels dragging against the marble. I watched until the heavy doors closed behind her, the sound reverberating like the end of a chapter. Later that evening, I sat alone in the study. The house was silent, except for the ticking of Daniel's old clock. I touched the desk where his pen had signed the clauses that saved me. Outside, the lights of the city stretched endlessly. Inside, peace finally settled, as if Daniel himself had drawn the curtains of protection around me. Vanessa had sought fortune and power. In the end, she gained nothing but shame. And I had reclaimed not just wealth, but dignity. The storm of gossip eventually died down, but Mr. Whitmore's phone call pulled me back into the whirlwind. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, we've uncovered a sealed addendum in Daniel's files. It was delivered to my office only last night, per his instructions. I think you'll want to hear it. I arrived at Whitmore's office with my chest tight, the rosary clutched between my fingers. An addendum? My Daniel had always been meticulous. But what could he have hidden even from me? Whitmore placed a small, sealed envelope on the desk. The paper yellowed slightly as if Daniel himself had wanted time to keep it secret. He instructed that this only be revealed after probate, once all disputes were settled. With steady hands, Whitmore opened it and began to read. To my beloved mother, Margaret. If you are reading this, then my fears were correct. I worried that Vanessa's ambitions would one day clash with your dignity. I could not stop her while alive, but I can protect you now. In addition to the trust, I am establishing a foundation in your name, the Caldwell Legacy Fund. $10 million will be allocated at once, under your sole control, to support causes you choose. This is not for Vanessa, nor for public applause. It is for you, Mom. For every sacrifice you made. For every night you went without. So I could have more. I want the world to know where I came from. And who made me. Who I was. My breath caught in my throat. A foundation. In my name. Whitmore's voice softened as he continued. Furthermore, should Vanessa contest this fund or attempt to interfere, she will automatically forfeit her right to appeal the estate, and all residual assets will remain with you. The room fell silent. It was Daniel's final safeguard, his last shield around me. He hadn't only given me security, he had entrusted me with legacy. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My son had thought of me not as a burden, not as a relic of his past, but as the very root of everything he had built. Whitmore leaned forward gently. Mrs. Caldwell, this clause ensures Vanessa has no avenue left. She is barred from contesting further. You hold everything. I nodded slowly, my vision blurring with tears. He knew her better than I wanted to admit, and he knew me better than I ever gave him credit for. That evening, I stood on the balcony of the mansion that was now undeniably mine. The city lights shimmered below, but my gaze lingered on the stars. Somewhere, I liked to believe Daniel was watching, satisfied that the woman who gave him life now carried forward his name, not with bitterness, but with strength. The foundation wasn't just money. It was proof that love leaves safeguards long after breath is gone. And Vanessa? She hadn't only lost wealth. She had lost the chance to rewrite the story Daniel left behind. Weeks passed, and the storm finally settled into silence. Vanessa's name still floated through conversations at the country club and whispered gossip in grocery store aisles. But the heat was gone. She had become a cautionary tale, proof that arrogance is a currency with no return. I never saw her again in person. Whitmore informed me she had fled to a rented apartment on the edge of town, stripped of her social circle, her credit ruined, her jewelry quietly pawned. The woman who once stood in designer heels, sneering down at me, was now invisible. Her power evaporated. And me? I moved carefully, quietly, as Daniel would have wanted. The Caldwell Legacy Fund launched that spring. We started with scholarships for architecture students. Daniel's dream carried forward. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor shook my hand and called me an inspiration to widows everywhere. Cameras flashed. But all I felt was my son's presence, warm and steady, as if he were still walking beside me. At home, the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum. I filled it with life again. The library became a community meeting space once a month. The conservatory brimmed with orchids and roses, their colors spilling like hope across the glass. In the evenings, I would sit in Daniel's study, the rosary in my hands, the silence no longer heavy with grief, but alive with memory. I thought often of that first day, Vanessa standing in this very room, gloating over a fortune she believed was hers. The irony lingered like perfume that refused to fade. She had celebrated too soon, blind to the trap my son had built with love and foresight. One night, as the grandfather clock struck midnight, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the window. From here, I could see the city stretching out in amber lights, the hum of life below. It was a view Vanessa once claimed for herself. Now it was mine, not because I fought for it with venom, but because Daniel's faith in me had outlasted her greed. I thought about forgiveness. Could I? Perhaps. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Vanessa would live with the knowledge that she lost everything, not because I defeated her, but because she defeated herself. The house creaked softly, as old houses do, settling into the night. I placed the rosary back in its wooden box, beside Daniel's fountain pen. Two symbols of faith and permanence. One spiritual, one practical, both of them saving me in their own way. As I turned off the lamp, the study fell into shadow. Outside, the wrought iron gate swung closed, with a final metallic sigh. Justice hadn't come with shouting or revenge. It had come quietly, like the closing of a door. Vanessa was gone. The fortune was safe. And I, Margaret Caldwell, finally breathed in the peace my son had promised me. The mansion stood silent behind me, its lights glowing warm against the night. A beacon, not of wealth, but of survival. And in that silence, I understood. Sometimes the cruelest victory is not noise, but calm.